Hey guys, I'm back. This is the first time I've ever started to film a video and had to stop and start over again. Usually I don't let mistakes and errors get in my way. I just keep on going. But it's weird. Two nights ago I was still turning on the heat, and I had my fan on today. So much for like the nice in between weather. I generally end up not even opening my window for more than 2 hours out of the entire year. Usually you get that first decent spring day, which may have been maybe like yesterday here. And I open my window for about an hour, but it's noisy. I'm sitting, I have a couple central air units right outside my window, and they're, turning on and off all the time, and then you hear all of a sudden things that you hadn't heard in ages, like since last year when I had my window open, like people's voices and stuff like that, and all kinds of noises. And I was trying to film, and it was just too noisy. Central air units are clicking off. I hear voices from people I can't see. I don't know where they are, but they're in a condo. They could be, on some balcony upstairs that I can't see or something. So it's a little disconcerting. And kept on screwing stuff. So I was 6 minutes into recording this, and I was screwing up so bad. It's like, what, this might be the time to just ditch it and try again. Today, and I'm going to start another series, and which will be a continuing thing. I'm only going to review one album, and the reason for that is a couple days ago I was actually I haven't been driving around a whole lot, being unemployed, so my trips are generally limited to stuff like grocery shopping, which is a short trip, and it just so I tend not to play music during short trips. I have NPR, National Public Radio, on my car about 75% of the time, and most of what I do is short trips, and it's not worth selecting an album to listen to because it's just not long enough to get into it or to listen to much of it. So I tend to listen to NPR, and then when I'm lucky and I have a longer trip to do, that's when the music kicks in. And my car plays MP3 discs, CDRs that you can record MP3 onto. And just the way that I digitize them into MP3, I get about 8.5 hours per disc. And I have a fairly thick, like that, little carrying case full of these MP3 discs. Doesn't look like a big carrying case, but the fact is when you're talking about that much, all MP3 discs with 8.5 hours on each one, that could be anywhere from 7 to 8 albums to 12, 13 albums. And so I actually technically have hundreds of albums in my car to listen to. So I've always got music in there in case I do the longer trips. Now, I have a friend in the hospital who's probably going to be in for probably a couple more weeks. And that was about a half hour away, and could be even longer depending on traffic. Perfect. I actually prefer that to them being even closer, because it gives me the opportunity to make a selection. And what I was going to select yesterday was this album I'm going to talk about. When I was all set and ready to go, and I had the album in the car with me, and I went to my mailbox, and that's when I had gotten the Dvorak New World Symphony album that Axel sent me, and I played that instead and made a video on that instead. Well, the only other weekly trip that I make in my car, since my washing dryer broke, or I have one of those apartment washer dryer things with one on top of the other, and the dryer broke, and you can't just replace one; you have to replace the whole unit. Unfortunately, there's not enough room in that little closet that it's in for me to buy two separate units. Even if there was room, I couldn't do it. There's one single electric plug, the specific type for washer dryer, and one only. So I have to buy another combo unit. So even if I could squeeze a side by side in there or buy the two units separately, I only have one plug, so I'm stuck. I'm stuck buying one of those apartment style units, which are ridiculously overpriced. They're much smaller and much more expensive than your standard washer dryer. So for almost a year now, I've been driving on a Saturday or Sunday. Now lately it's been Sundays, over to my sister's house, which again is about a half hour away, and that's the only opportunity I get to really select something to listen to. And especially I usually end up coming back later in the day, evening. A lot of times it's dark, and that's an even better listening experience. So today, since I didn't do it yesterday when I was going to the hospital, I decided to review this, and I'm reviewing this. There's a couple of reasons. I'm gonna do this. This is music from Around Tower by Dirk Mont Campbell. Since this is the only solo album of his I have, it's an easy choice to review. I probably wouldn't do a review of somebody like a Tangerine Dream and a Klaus Schultz. I wouldn't review a single disc for the most part, probably, simply because I have so much of their music and I've listened to so much that I would probably include most of the important albums, or their important albums, to me. So I'm gonna in the future weeks look for things that I don't have an extensive catalog by the artist, and that one of their works is a particular standout, or maybe that might be the only disc I have by them, but it's one that means something, is fairly important in some way or another. And this has to me, an interesting history. I would probably to this day not know that this album exists if it weren't for the old-fashioned CD record stores. I first saw this in 1996 when it was a new release, and I think it was in the New Age section of a record store, just when flipping through, the miscellaneous section, and it's like, oh, I never knew he made a solo album. Now I know Dirk Mont Campbell from the Canterbury progressive rock scene of the late 60s and 70s. He was, probably still is, best known as a bass player who, oddly enough, his second instrument of choice was the French horn, which is an interesting combination. And his more adventurous bands that he was in of the prog rock variety would use him on French horn to some extent. And primarily he was the bass player. But there would be a track or two where they might use French horn, which he plays wonderfully. And he was always associated very closely in those days with the keyboard player Dave Stewart, who was the guy in National Health and Egg and all those bands of that era. Who else? He was he played in Bill Bruford's band. He was the keyboard player for the Bruford Quartet Ensemble. And I'm talking about Dave Stewart here. National Health, Egg, bands like that. Anyway, you may or may not know them. But this guy Dirk Mont Campbell is very closely associated with Dave Stewart. So basically, followed Dave Stewart around quite a bit. And he played. Now, these are fairly obscure bands if you don't know Canterbury, even though they all recorded. Who did he play with? He was, besides Dave Stewart, Steve Hillage. They were tight in their early days. And there was this band, and I don't know if their record came out at the time or whether it came out after these guys got better known, but there was a band, Uriel, in 1968 that had Steve Hillage, Dave Stewart, and Mont Campbell together. And I don't know if that Uriel album came out until after all those guys got much better known. Steve Hillage playing in Gong and, his own solo stuff. So, Uriel, who was it? I think it was Hillage. Steve Hillage left Uriel, and they changed their name to Egg. And Egg made a few albums that were fairly well received in that kind of obscure Canterbury progressive group, and Mont Campbell was the bass player there, and also was playing some French horn in there. But he actually left the band Egg to go formally study music at college. And you could tell he was kind of bent in that direction, because the one thing with Dirk Campbell, when I would see him in one band to the other, it seemed like he's the guy that they would call if they needed a bass player that could learn music real fast. So he was very, I think, technically adept, and had more of a traditional classical type of training. And it's not surprising that he would go on to do things beyond rock music. Some of this progressive stuff is barely rock music, or it's a pretty damn sophisticated rock music. A lot of this stuff is, at least in the case of the Canterbury guys, sophisticated enough to almost fall into the jazz category, where a lot of prog rock doesn't really fall into that. It's not that technical. So Mont Campbell went on, and I never kind of knew what happened to him. He did a lot of sessions in the 70s. He was actually part of the original lineup of National Health, which was probably Dave Stewart's biggest band, the keyboard player, Dave Stewart. And he toured with them, but he ended up leaving before their first album came out. And I think later on, when their bass player left, I think Dirk Campbell went into the band then, and may have done some recording later into their career. But he kind of was, in the late 70s, wanting to get away from that rock music. And apparently always had a strong interest in what was now called, what we would now call world music, but essentially ethnic music back then. And this album reflects that. And I saw this in '96, and I didn't buy it. And in its original issue. And, I didn't buy it, it's not because I didn't want it, but, at that time, I guess there was just a lot more stuff in the store than I had money for. And I think it originally came out on the Resurgence label, which was a British label based in the UK. I'm pretty sure it was an import then. I never forgot about it, though. And over the years, I would look for it, and it went out of print, and may even be out of print now. And I remember, again, I started seriously looking at a couple years ago for it, and I started getting. I had read a little bit about it, how much it's a kind of a world music album, and the more I read about it, the more I wanted it. And looking online at the time, it was apparently out of print, and I try to always buy new copies when I can afford it, when I can. I don't have a lot of used CDs or albums, and the prices were just incredible, and it looks like I wasn't going to be able to get it. I was kicking myself for just not picking it up when I first saw it at the store. Every Christmas with my sister, we still make Christmas lists because otherwise we have no idea what to get for each other. And I happened to be looking again online, and all of a sudden there were copies available for slightly more reasonable price. And actually, I think I've looked since then, and they're even cheaper than they were then. But I think it was around $20 new, even at Christmas time. But it appeared that there were more copies all of a sudden for some reason floating around. Now this got reissued in 1997, a year after the original '96 issue. And it's on a company called Eastside Digital. Now, I have some Eastside Digital recordings. I thought they went out of business, too. I'm really sure they're out of business. I don't know if somebody else bought their catalog and is possibly reissuing it, where sometimes what happens, an individual album, all of a sudden these copies, these leftover copies that are still sealed or new, whatever, all of a sudden get found in a warehouse somewhere and snatched up by somebody who sells them. I didn't think Eastside Digital still existed. And that's the version that I have. I put it on my Christmas list. I put it way high on the top of my Christmas list. Get this first. This is the most important one. And which my sister did. And I ended up getting it for Christmas. This is actually pretty much the last batch of new music that I got. I have a couple stragglers, couple things that I got for literally a few dollars since then. Maybe 2 CDs, and then the Dvorak that Axel sent me might have been maybe only the 3rd CD that I've got since Christmas. That's an incredible dry spell for me. Even going back to the days before CDs were out buying albums. I've bought less music in this time period since Christmas than I have in my adult life. So I'm savoring what I have, because I have such an extensive collection, which tells you absolutely nothing about the album. This is a really good album. This is a world music album, essentially. It's got 20 pieces on there, but the first 15 pieces, unless you're physically playing the CD and looking at the counter that tells you what track is on, you don't realize it. It says the first 15 tracks basically play as one big long piece. None of them fade out that would tell you this is the ending of this track. They all pretty much stop, and it goes right to the next track, which abruptly starts with very little, if any, break. So essentially, the first 15 out of 20 tracks, which is the first 42 minutes out of the 52-minute album, is essentially one big long thing, and you would think you just heard one big long composition. And those breaks just happen every time the music changes something about it. It clicks to another track. But if you were just listening to it, you would think you were listening to one big long track. And when the 15th track ends, there's this kind of humorous pretend audience that all of a sudden comes in on track 16. There's a 14-second break when the 15th track ends, and it's basically what does he call it? I have to go and look this up because I don't know where it is. It's called A Moment to Listen to the Audience. Now, there is no audience. This isn't a live album. And I think the audience is comprised of the musicians who play on the album. But it's a mock pretend audience with people commenting kind of on the music. It's quite funny, and it's definitely got Mont's sense of humor from, if you know, some of the ways he titles pieces are quite funny in his past progressive rock history. Not here. He doesn't have any funnily titled things here. But this moment to listen to the audience that goes on for 14 seconds is quite funny, because I think it's the musicians probably they're playing with, and they're commenting on the music that they've heard for the prior 42 minutes for 14 seconds, and then all of a sudden it clicks on to the next track, and the last 10 minutes of the album concludes. The next 4 tracks are also just seamless, go into each other. If it weren't for that break, the entire album would essentially sound like one big long piece. But it's a fantastic, man, I hate the way that I use that. I can't not use that word when I describe albums that I like. It's essentially a world music album, which is what Dirk Campbell's interest has been for many years. And Campbell himself figured out, obviously there's a lot of overdubs on here, and a very small group of musicians. There's only actually 4 musicians on this. And 2 of them are vocalists. One of them is Barbara Gaskin, who, if you know Dave Stewart, records a lot with Dave Stewart, the keyboard player. And so there's 2 vocalists, both female. And they do all kinds of, they don't do generally lyrics. There's some chanting, and there's a couple brief things that reminded me of Eberhard Weber's Fluid Russell. If you're familiar with that album, just in terms of the vocal things. There's Bonnie Herman and Norma Winstone sing wordless vocals on that album, using the vocals as an instrument. And there's 2 ladies here too. And there's a couple moments that are very similar to that vibe. They only last, unfortunately, for a couple minutes. For me, they could have gone on much longer because they're very pretty. And apart from that, there's this guy with like 17 letters for his last name, who I'm not going to try to pronounce, who plays sows, oud, and Comanche. I should look up what that instrument is. I don't know what it is. Oud is the only thing I know what it is, a stringed instrument. I think Turkish. It's like a Turkish lute. And that's pretty noticeable throughout the whole album. There's a lot of oud playing. Campbell himself plays all kinds of flutes. There's a lot of reedy instruments that sound like they're Egyptian and from foreign cultures. He plays reed pipes, bansuri, which I know is a type of flute. Palim, there's all Ney flute, which I know. So he plays a lot of that. That's weird because I don't see him listed here on playing keyboards. And there's quite a lot of keyboards on here. That's funny that there's not a single person listed as playing keyboards, and I'm sure. Well, that's weird. That's weird because there's definitely things that sound like sound samples played through a keyboard. One of the things on here that I noticed a lot of is gamelan. If anybody, Carm would know what gamelan is. Like Indonesia, Bali, places like that. If you ever see like a History Channel thing, they have these metal. Some of them are varying sizes, round metal circles, half circles that they lay on the ground, and they actually hit with various types of hammers, and they play them and they ring out, and it's an odd tuning system, but they play notes from these metallic things, and they're very metallic sound, but they're all different notes, and there's a lot of that going on in here, and because there's no gamelan listed here as being one of the instruments, I'm thinking that's probably sampled on the keyboard. You definitely hear some piano. There's very little electronic sounds in here. Almost all the sounds are acoustic, even if they come, I believe, from a synthesizer. So the fact that they didn't list gamelan and it's prominent at the beginning of the album leads me to think that there's a bunch of sampled things in here. I definitely hear piano, which may again be a sampled piano played on a synthesizer keyboard. A little bit of electronic keyboard in a couple places here and there, but for the most part, there's a lot of oud playing, different types of vocals, including Mont Campbell, who sings some vocals. Most of the vocals are the two females singing it, and they're overdubbed, so there's multiple parts there. Sometimes it sounds very ethnic. There's no rock element to this. A lot of Western musicians, when they do world music, kind of do that. They add their own rock element. And yet, by the same token, I don't think this is an attempt to do music that is purely specific to a country. In other words, it's not really Mont Campbell doing Indonesian music. It's rather him using the sounds and the instruments of that culture to try to create this whole thing. There's bagpipes in here, and since they're not listed, well, I don't know what reed pipes are. Reed pipe might be a form of bagpipe because I hear something that sounds a hell of a lot like a bagpipe, and it doesn't sound like a keyboard sample. So it even has that. There's this bagpipe thing that goes throughout there, and not necessarily in the traditional sense of the Irish or Scottish music bagpipe type thing. It's a trip. It's a 52-minute trip. Very well recorded. Well, it was recorded in '96, so it should be, but I mean, the sound is incredible. I hear a lot of hand percussion, and there's a couple instruments here that I don't know what they are. They could be hand percussion, or they could be using sampled, but percussion sounds. It's mostly frame drum and those small various ethnic Middle Eastern, a lot of Middle Eastern flavors in this, especially in the wind instruments. A lot of the more nasal things that kind of sound like a nasal, if you're not familiar with them, like more like a nasal soprano saxophone. And but the thing is, it's not avant-garde at all. It doesn't get noisy. It doesn't get into free jazz territory. They don't start honking away. There's none of that. So if you are familiar at all with the sound of some of these instruments, this album will not come off as being an avant-garde exercise to you. If you're not familiar with them, I don't know how it would sound. It would sound foreign, but not totally unapproachable, I don't think. It's actually a beautiful album, beautifully recorded. I wish it did a better job. It does list the musicians and what they play, but no keyboards listed. Here's clearly keyboards on this. But it's wow. It's a great disc. Like I said, this edition is the East Side Digital edition, and I'm playing this simply because of the record label and because I was wondering. I put my foot in my mouth numerous times when I say that. I bet you here's an album I bet Carm doesn't have, and I should never. I should know better by now than to say that. But I'm gonna guess, and because I'm saying it, he's gonna tell me he's got it. Between Dirk Campbell, who Carm may know who he is, he probably does, but may not know that he recorded a solo album or any solo albums. And because the label Eastside Digital is not, it's not an ECM where fans like me tend to check out just about everything that comes out of ECM. And other labels that specialize in a certain type of music, and if you like that music, you check out the other artists on this label. This Eastside Digital, I could be wrong, but I want to say the keyboard player Kit Watkins, who's largely, or almost completely, an electronic keyboard player. I want to say was the other guy that I have discs by that recorded for Eastside Digital. I could be wrong. And that music is very different than this, which will go to show you whatever did come out on this label was not necessarily tied to a specific style. And again, I don't think Eastside Digital exists anymore. But this is, I really so wanted to play this in the background, but I didn't know what would happen with the copyright stuff. And it would be great to get a sample of this for folks that may have no idea what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of the reedy instruments on here. It's just a fantastic trip, and I was driving and looked, and I was on like track 5 before I realized that I thought I was still on track 1. Very seamless, very nice album, kind of short at 52 minutes, and with the exception of that one a humorous break with the mock audience, pretty much plays seamlessly. And if you blink, the mock audience thing is 14 seconds. You would miss that, and it just goes on for the last 10 minutes of the album. Really beautiful album, very approachable, not avant-garde. The only thing is, for Western folks not familiar with the instruments, it depends, because sometimes people hear, especially those Middle Eastern sounding horns, those nasal horns that sound, sometimes the Middle Eastern India has a lot of unusual reed instruments. Sometimes people can't approach something that they're not familiar with the sound. But if you can, it's a fantastic album. I would definitely seek more things out by him. And I think the only other things that he's done is like more collaborative albums that he co-led, and I don't know how much input he has into those in terms of the musical direction. But great album. I want to continue this series where I'm just reviewing a single album based on, not just because I'm listening to them in the car, but I'm getting a different perspective, because obviously I wouldn't review an album that I listened to for the most part only once. I did the Dvorak thing because that was VCLT, but most of these I wouldn't just play in the car once and review them. It's just giving me a different perspective, especially if you're lucky enough to drive at night, because from my experience, even if it's not necessarily night music, the experience of listening to something at night as you're driving, especially alone, which I do, is really enhances the experience, especially nowadays more so than even it used to be, because, like I've mentioned in another video, trying to sit and listen to music at home has become increasingly difficult in the computer age, and even once cable TV came along, because it's like you're sitting there listening to something and, meaning to really give it your full attention, and 10-15 minutes later you find yourself checking email and going on the internet, and somebody sent you something, or maybe you turn on the TV, which I do sometimes with the sound turned down, and if you have the news on or something like that, and there's a news story that you want to see, you take the sound off, and next thing you know, even without that, even with just reading email and responding to email or something like that, you might be reading something and realize that you haven't paid attention to the record that you've been playing for the last 20 minutes. Very hard to get out of that practice nowadays. Obviously, I didn't even grow up with all those things at hand. But to just stop and just listen to music is almost it's almost impossible. It's a task. It's hard to do now. And so I'm finding that this car listening is probably a good way to do it. To find an album that I really do want to review, give it another listen to in the car for that extra added perspective, because I can't do anything unless unless I get into an accident or something. I'm going to be paying attention to the music. And so I'm going to continue this, and I'm going to now start this thing where, prior to my laundry week, or if I have to go to the hospital for a visit or something like that, I'm going to be selecting albums and taking them with me, and when I come back, doing a little mini review. Though for the most part, I'm going to stick with albums that are worthwhile buying and listening to. If I play something that turns out to be horrible, why even bother? I would mention it in the context of somebody's body of work, but there's not much of a reason to just review a single album and have it be something that is basically not worth buying. Okay, guys, this went a lot longer, I guess, than I wanted it to, but I wanted to kind of explain my new series, whatever you want to call it. And once again, thanks for viewing and commenting and all that. And if you like world music at all, or adventurous instrumental music, wow, is this fantastic. And again, I don't know whether this is in print. Music from the Round Tower, and I love that cover. And it took me how many years, since '96 to December of 2014, for me to actually get a copy finally. So guys, I hope you're having a great weekend or week or whenever you're viewing this, and I'll be back all too soon. Good night.